To Diablo. And the party's name is Annie Oakland.
In the early 50s, Westerns were what was happening.
But there was not a female Western star on television.
She outshone and outshot the men.
This was a woman in danger, that this is a woman taking care of business.
She became a role model for a lot of the little girls, but Annie and Mother to me were one. My mother was born as Betty Jean Grayson, and she was born in McGee, Arkansas. My grandfather was a doctor, so he had started a hospital in McGee and then became an internist, and they all moved to Little Rock.
I was the only girl on my block when we moved up to Little Rock, and so I was a tomboy. It was fun, but to think that I would do something like that when I got older was, no, that was ridiculous.
She always loved dramatics in one way or another. She was in school plays, she learned how to sing, she learned how to dance. After high school, she went on to Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania. Her girlfriend had told her about Bryn Mawr and told her about Richard Nash, who was head of the dramatics department up there at the time. And she went up there and just loved Richard Nash and learned an awful lot from him. From there, she went on to the University of Texas in Austin. While Mother was at the university, this is when World War II was going on, Mother got involved with the camp shows to help entertain the soldiers. While she was doing that, she ended up with a blind date with a lieutenant by the name of Bob Davis. They went swimming and he turned her around at the end of the pool and said, "I don't know, you might think I'm crazy, but I'm going to marry you." And she said, "Well, you might think I'm crazy, but I'm going to say yes." Mom continued to do the camp shows and go to school, and while she was doing these camp shows, entertaining the troops, it just so happened that at the same time Gene Autry was coming through. He was also entertaining in these camp shows, and they happened to meet.
I've always admired this man, even back in Little Rock, you know, when I used to go to the Saturday features.
And that was it. They had no idea that years later they were going to be working together. After the war and Mother had graduated from college, she and Bob Davis moved to Hollywood to literally seek their fame and fortune. When they got to Hollywood, everybody else was doing the same thing. There were no apartments available, there was no place to stay, so the two of them got a place at the Hollywood Plaza Hotel, and she became a hat check girl, and Mr. Davis became a bouncer at the Palladium, where they had the big bands and all of that. At the top of the hotel, they had an exercise area and a pool, and she would go up there quite a bit to get some sun and exercise and swim. And a gentleman approached her up there one day and handed her his card and said, "You ought to be in pictures. That, you know, you're beautiful. You need to pursue." And Mother just kind of thought, nah, this guy is just playing a game. So she went downstairs and talked to the concierge of the hotel and said, "Is this guy legit?" And the guy went, "Yeah, that one you want to call. He's from MGM, and I would do exactly as he says." They did a screen test on her. She didn't think she did such a good job, but apparently they thought she did because they put her under contract. As soon as they do that with a lot of people, they change the name. So here's what happened with hers. Her maiden last name was Grayson, and they had a Catherine Grayson already, so that wasn't going to work. And people just sit around the table. They sit around a table and just discuss this. Somebody came up with the name Gail, and that was it. There wasn't any big spiel other than she couldn't be Catherine Grayson or Betty Davis, so she became Gail Davis, and she loved it. So when Mother first went out to Hollywood, her girlfriend back home had said, Betty Jean, you have got to have lunch, meet Van Johnson, whatever you do, find him, meet him. Well, it just so happened at MGM, her first feature film was Romance of Rosie Ridge, starring Van Johnson and Janet Leigh. Mother was at MGM for about 3 months. And after that, she went on to RKO. MGM and RKO did a lot of training with their new people, whether it was singing or dancing or even elocution lessons, which is speech, and with Mother's Southern accent, they were trying to get rid of it. Howard Hughes came in and purchased RKO and then fired a lot of people, Mother being one of them. So she started freelancing after that. She ended up at Republic with her first credited role on The Far Frontier, starring Roy Rogers. The reason she got that role was that Roy's wife, Gail, who always plays aside him, happened to be pregnant at the time. She was comfortable on a horse, she was comfortable using a gun, although she hadn't had a lot of training yet. She was obviously a natural. Because of that, her freelance career took her into the world of westerns with such greats as Six Gun Mesa with Johnny Mac Brown, Brand of Fear with Jimmy Wakely, Death Valley Gunfighters with Rocky Lane, and South of Death Valley with Charles Starrett and Smiley Burnett.
Gene Autry was the very first of the giant superstars of the singing cowboys, and Republic Pictures made a fortune off of Gene. And after the war, Gene said, I want some of this money in my own pocket, and he decided to switch allegiances and leave Republic and go to Columbia under his own production banner. And he was making features simultaneous to Roy Rogers making the features at Republic, so they were real competitors then.
During this period of time, while she was doing all these westerns with these wonderful gentlemen, she was approached by Armand Schaefer, Mandy Schaefer, who is one of Gene Autry's producers, to come to a screen test for them because they were looking for another leading lady for Gene.
And I was scared to death because I was, I was very young then, and I very impressed by the people around me and everything, and what an opportunity it would be, and I wanted so badly to get this opportunity.
Armand Schaefer had been with Gene all the way back to Tumbling Tumbleweeds and The Old Corral, his first movies at Republic that were directed by Joe Kane.
Mandy had seen The Far Frontier and thought she would be a really good person to bring in to work with Gene.
He was very cute. He said, well, Gene, he said, she looks good in jeans, so let's try her in this particular show, which the girl wore blue jeans all the way through it. And it was called Cowtown. So fortunately, I was able to get the part. It wasn't just for the jeans. I mean, I could ride a little too.
She was cast as the leading lady. The lead actually goes to the horse. This was always the running story in westerns, because as long as the horse's ears were up and the horse looked good, then it was a take. It didn't matter if you muffed your lines, it was a take.
It started out with me riding out of the barn on Champ. And then Champ says, hey, I don't want this girl on me, so he stops quick. I fall off the horse into a mud puddle. Gene comes around and looks and stands there laughing, and I think, I'll get even with you, you son of a gun.
You did that on purpose.
Sure I did. That was my horse you were stealing.
Stealing? So now I'm stealing horses, am I?
And needless to say, the crew, they made me do it about 20 times just to see me fall in the mud,
Mom really enjoyed doing Cowtown, and everybody loved her. So they went right into the next Gene Autry movie, which was done back-to-back, called Sons of New Mexico, and follow that up with Indian Territory. She was also invited to do stage performances around the United States with Gene Autry's troops.
Well, he brought me in easy. We started out in 1949, and he took me on 21 one-night stands. Now, that was easy. I thought, geez, this is fun. We came back to California, and then we were here for like 3 weeks. And then he said, we have another tour we're going out on. Are you ready to go? And I said, oh, you bet. And he said, it's 79 one-night stands. 79?
And what they were doing was actually testing her to see how much she could handle being on the road that many days and riding the horses and shooting the guns and singing up a storm with the troops.
He's wonderful to go on tour with. And his whole troupe with the tour company is the same way that they are with the picture company. Everybody's in the same boat, so everybody doubles in brass and everybody carries their own suitcases. They're fabulous to work with.
But television was making inroads in the late 40s, and all of the major studios, MGM, Warner Brothers, Columbia, Universal, they didn't want any of their people going to television at all. In fact, some of them even had in their contracts that their stars under contract were not allowed to do television. Well, what happened is the smaller studios, the independents, a lot of the B-Western studios who had been turning out films in the 30s and 40s just unloaded all of their films on television.
And then suddenly the more astute businessmen decided, let's go ahead and move into syndicated television with these certain cowboy stars who had a following from movies, some of which had been made 20 years before.
William Boyd had purchased the rights of the Hopalong Cassidy films and not only sold those reruns to the networks, but they were so popular that he went back into production making half-hour Hopalong Cassidy television shows. Gene Autry saw all of this and said, I'm making my own half-hour TV shows, and he continued to make features at Columbia, even while he was going into production with Flying A Productions to make the Gene Autry show.
He had his finger on the pulse of everything that was going on in the film industry. By having these half-hour shows, it showed his progressiveness, and that's why he always seemed to stay ahead of the game.
What Gene Autry did when he established Flying A Productions and was going to go into television is he brought an entire framework of all the people who had worked with him in the movies to do his television series. So it was always this kind of insular family situation, and I think that was very much by design. It worked for John Ford, it worked for Sam Peckinpah, it worked for Gene Autry. They had this group that he trusted, and Gail Davis, she was part of that group.
Don't you like it? Don't you think it's pretty?
Of course I do, Pat. It's perfectly lovely.
Oh, gee, I can't wait to see you wearing that with your Sunday dress when we go to church together. Just you and me.
Well, it's not especially for the ranch.
Shooting the Gene Autry show obviously brought her back to Hollywood as opposed to being on the road, and that also allowed her to go ahead and do some more feature films like Yukon Manhunt with Kirby Grant and Flying Leathernecks with John Wayne. And remembering, she was still freelancing at this point. So while she was shooting these features, she was also doing television shows, some half-hour episodes of The Lone Ranger and Kit Carson and The Cisco Kid. She was able to spend more time with her husband and have some kind of a family life there, which apparently happened because at that period of time she did get pregnant with her one and only child, and that would be me.
The success that he had in syndicated television suddenly meant that there was an explosion of product that was coming out of his production company.
Gene said, well, this is working. I'm going to make some more TV shows. Gene, of course, was one of the great businessmen.
He went from, I'm going to do a syndicated TV series starring myself, into being the executive producer of half a dozen shows.
He branched out and did one starring his famous horse, Champion. Champion had his own series, too.
With Gene Autry, you're looking at someone whose audience was primarily, it skewed younger. And when he moved into television, he absolutely was going to try and capture that audience. That was his popular audience. He was still aiming absolutely at the heart of America, but also the younger heart of America. And that's what he wanted to keep going.
Autry came up with an idea, being the progressive person that he was, to look for heroines for little girls, just like there were heroes for little boys.
The hero, whether it was the Lone Ranger or Hopalong Cassidy or Sky King, Sky was always protecting Penny.
There were no women to be able to stand up for the little girls.
I'm driving this wagon into town, and the only way you can stop me is by using that gun you're so quick with. Get up!
The woman was either a housewife, a schoolmarm, in distress, or she was a bad girl.
Water's a little deep to wade in, isn't it?
Well, if you think it's funny having your horse run away.
He felt that a little girl should have a heroine, and not just a cowboy hero, you know. So Annie Oakley herself was a fantastic lady.
Not that the show itself was going to portray her life because it was fictitious, but rather her personality with her strengths, with her charm, and with her femininity.
What he did is he took this character, and it was kind of putting that brand on it. It was a woman in the West that everyone knew, and she was a hero. And I think he saw the idea, particularly with a show that would have a certain appeal to children, and that the idea of doing a female-driven Western was just good business.
He put out what we call a cattle call all over the United States. It was a newspaper clipping, and my mother happened to read it in the LA Times, and she went, "Oh my gosh, that part's for me. I want that part."
And of course, they ran a contest throughout the United States, and they tested over 200 girls for it. But now, you know, they're looking for somebody that can ride a horse, shoot a gun, can act, and look to be about 20 years old. Put that all in one package.
So she went in and she talked to Mandy Schaefer, and Mandy said, "No, sorry, Gail, you know, you're Gene's leading lady, can't, you know, we just can't go there. He's looking for somebody totally new."
And I decided I was going to try for this. I wore a pair of blue jeans, and then I put no makeup, put my hair in pigtails, and put freckles on my nose. Well, I went into Schaefer's office, and he looked at me and he says, "You know, you're not going to give up, are you?" I said, "I just want a test for it, Mandy. Please, give me a chance." So I did the test, and I guess I won it.
Bullseye!
The pilot was done in 1951, and the cast was almost the same. Of course, Gail Davis was Annie, and Brad Johnson was Lofty Craig, but Tag was played by Billy Gray, who later went on to play Bud on the Father Knows Best TV series. It didn't sell. Something about it, it just didn't click.
The character that she portrayed, or they were having her portray, was more of a teenager kind of person, and a little bit too soft, too feminine, too much the other way.
They'll go away. All the birds and bear and deer and Mr. Hoppity's family. And be shot down by people, just like they hit a moving target.
And it didn't fly at all. People didn't care for it.
They did another pilot. Billy Gray at that time was in Father Knows Best, and they got Jimmy Hawkins, who turned out to be a better choice anyway.
And somewhere between the first and second shooting of the Annie Oakley pilot, my parents, because of conflicting schedules and both of them being so busy and then me being in the middle of it as well, it just didn't work. So they got a divorce. Gene's troupe, entertainment troupe, went to England, and Mother went with them, and they entertained at the Empress Hall there in England. But while she was there, she got word that the pilot had sold. Canada Dry had picked it up, and Mom packed her bags and said, "See y'all, I got a show to do," and she headed on back to the United States, and thereby starting to shoot the Annie Oakley series.
For her to have this series, it was just a great break for her, because no other woman had starred in a dramatic series where she outshone and outshot the men.
She was her own woman. She took care of Diablo because her uncle was, the storyline is such that her uncle was always out of town.
Garrett! Oh, Annie, is your uncle here?
No, he isn't, Mr. Willits. He's out of town on business, but his deputy's around here somewhere. Something wrong?
So Annie had to be the one that went out and rounded up the, the bad guys.
She was actually the head of that town, which was so different for little girls to see as opposed to seeing men in that role all the time.
She never killed anybody, and she just wounded them, and then her deputy sheriff would bring them in, put them in jail.
Brad Johnson's character as the sheriff is a little bit of a puzzle because he is remarkably ineffective as a lawman. He is always asking Annie, who we don't know if she's his girlfriend, yes or no. Sometimes she kisses him, sometimes she just goes, "Oh, you," and pushes him away.
Sure wish I had a pretty gal to iron my shirts.
Don't you want her for anything else, Lofty?
Oh, no, Annie.
Mother was sweet, she was charming, she was kind, she was generous, but she was also tough. And she called a spade a spade.
It was a peculiar mix sometimes because you would have bursts of violence and dramatics like The Rifleman. Then mixed in with the way Annie would retaliate would be to shoot a clothesline to get the bad guys tangled up in it, or shoot a bucket off of a well and it would hit somebody on the head.
It taught that you can make peace by, if you shoot at a pot-bellied stove and hit a skillet, come back and it hits the gun belt and knocks it off of a guy, that's pretty good shooting.
She was a better actress than the show sometimes allowed her to be, because they loved to do the kind of perky interchanges that she had with Tag and the stuff with her brother, but the quiet, dramatic moments of the series, and they are there, which makes it a little bit unusual for a show that's directed primarily for a young audience, for an audience of kids. She really shines.
There aren't going to be any witnesses. This is Chet Sterling's six-shooter. There are still 3 unfired cartridges in it. It'll be found here with your bodies. Let's make it ladies first, shall we?
She could outdraw, outshoot, outride most any of the people in the series.
I have a kid brother, too, and just wait till you meet him.
Jimmy Hawkins is Tag. He's quite good because he was physical and he could do things on horseback.
There are stories about Tag, they'd lose him because he'd be on his horse and he'd be gone, and they'd be calling him to be there on the set to shoot something. They couldn't find him because he was out there roaming the hills with Pixie.
In one particular episode, I believe it's Annie Trusts a Convict, Jimmy gets into a real tussle with Myron Healy. I mean, he really holds his own, and he does very well with it. The problem with Jimmy Hawkins sometimes is the way the character is written, and of course, little brothers can be obnoxious, and they didn't really spare that in the way they wrote Tag.
Ouch! You got a bullseye, Annie!
Annie Oakley was done for limited money because that was the production setup when the show was produced.
They shot in several locations. One would have been Gene's Ranch, Melody Ranch. Another place was Vasquez Rock, which was kind of up by Bakersfield a little bit. Another place was Pioneer Town, which is down by Palm Springs, and most of these were exteriors.
And everything was close by, so the Range Rider, Champion, Annie Oakley, Gene Autry show, they were all shot locally. He didn't venture to Lone Pine that I know of because it was about a 4.5-hour drive, 5-hour drive probably back then.
Same crew worked on Annie, as did the Range Rider and Buffalo Bill Jr. as far as Gene shows were concerned.
They shot 3 shows a week. They worked 7 days a week. And Mother did her own makeup, she did her own hair, and she did her own wardrobe.
Those things were budgetary items, and so they were all looked at very carefully, just like having a guest star as a bad guy in one episode that you might be shooting in the same location. He was going to be a good guy in another episode.
What's so cool about that period of time is everybody was on everybody else's show.
Well, of course, Gene always used Harry Lauder and Stanley Andrews and the great character actors of the B-Westerns. But some of the young up-and-comers also were in these Annie Oakleys. I think you're going to have a great time trying to spot them.
Clayton Moore was on Annie Oakley, like Mother was on Lone Ranger. Alan Hale Jr. was on, Fess Parker.
And a couple of episodes down the line, he's in another one, playing a different character, probably wearing the same outfit.
That's also how money was saved, because they would have extras in those 3 shows, and they'd be all the same extras.
Again, the story approach, even as juvenile storylines go, it didn't follow the set pattern that we would see in other shows from this time.
That's the best shooting I ever saw. Yeah. We'll rush him.
Here was a strong woman. And plus, doing some terrific riding and roping, and they always did action scenes with her, and interesting action scenes.
As good as Mother was with her stunts and jumping on the horse and riding like the wind and all of that, part of her contract was that she did the close-ups, but the long shots had to be done by a stunt woman. And a lady named Donna Hall came on the scene, and she was fabulous, and she looked very much like Mother. But she did a lot of the long shots and the standing on the horse and jumping on the trains.
Because they wanted people to see that this was a woman in danger, that this is a woman taking care of business, and those are just not the norm of shows from that period.
When the show first aired, which was in 1954, it was a huge success from the very beginning. Little girls loved her, little boys loved her, the parents loved her.
Suddenly you had a female cowboy star who was doing exactly what the boys were doing and doing it better.
I don't suppose it would do any good to say that you can't come with me. That it's too dangerous? That you just be in my way?
None at all. And I know television was still relatively new too, so the idea of television in and of itself, to have these wonderful stars in the middle of your living room, was totally exciting to these kids.
And this, of course, taps into an entire group of youngsters, all those little girls, some of whom were interested in cowboy things anyway, because cowboys were everywhere. Westerns were it. That was the big thing. But they didn't have their own Western hero, and now they did.
And I think she did a great job, because she was able to balance the femininity with the strength.
Let's go!
And so making a brand new role model for little girls.
The explosion of merchandising was just unending.
There were coloring books, there were cutout dolls, and of course with Annie Oakley, you could target some of the women too, some of the little girls with Annie Oakley dolls, paper dolls.
The lunch pails, the little outfits.
The image and the trademark of each one of these cowboys became something that all these youngsters wanted to own and wanted to possess, because they wanted to relate to it. I wanted to be Hoppy. My sister wants to be Annie Oakley. My friend wants to be Roy Rogers.
They took it out on the streets. They wore it to the rodeos. They'd wear it to the market. I do remember seeing a couple of kids being very upset when their mothers wouldn't let them wear some of the stuff that they wanted to wear.
Say, there is something that you can do every day that'll help you to be a better horseman. You can help build your body by eating Wonder Bread.
You don't call that work.
During the Annie Oakley series, there were many sponsors, and Mother did the commercials for all of them. Whether it was Wonder Bread or Canada Dry or Frisky's dog food or Laura Scudder's potato chips. They did their own commercials. They worked for their own sponsors.
The other media outlets, certainly that Autry was always going to take advantage of, were the comics. And the Delph, what they used to call the 4-color comic series, did television tie-ins for every single Flying A production. And it was a gigantic money watershed that went so far beyond the money that was being generated just from the broadcast and the advertising of the television series. And I would hazard a guess it was more lucrative.
Nothing lasts forever except for Gunsmoke, and Annie Oakley is no exception. Just like the other popular shows that were in the 50s, their time came and their time went. The shows became more adult. The kids' shows became cartoons.
When the show was over, Annie was not. Mother continued to be Annie until her dying day. She was on some guest appearances, Perry Como, which was one of my favorites.
I know she did an Andy Griffith episode once, and she outshot Andy Griffith in that they had her as a sharpshooter in that episode too.
She became the Annie that was the Annie Oakley show and continued to be that person. Of course, that person was never far from who my mother was anyway. And it was an honor for her.
I wouldn't trade those days for anything. They were some of the happiest days of my life. I'm very grateful that that I was chosen to play Gene's leading lady in so many features. And then was fortunate enough to be able to play the part of Annie Oakley because of Gene and his company and everything.
And she continued to do rodeo appearances and personal appearances, and then got into the nostalgia conventions.
We gave her a Golden Boot Award, and her co-star in many of the shows, and also a contract player at Flying A with her, Dick Jones, presented the Golden Boot to her. And Gene Autry was in the audience.
And there were scads of people, scads, and they're behind barriers and leaning over and, you know, autograph, autograph. Mother got stopped there, and she stood there, and I watched her for a while, and I thought, my God, woman, how do you do this? She loved her fans. They had to come get her, because they were about to start the program. They were about to start the Golden Boot Awards, and she's still outside with the fans. They're going, where is Gail?
It was a thrilling night for them. You could see her on stage glowing, and she broke down and started to cry, but there were tears of happiness. She certainly deserved the Golden Boot, and she brought joy to millions of kids, and probably their fathers too.
After she passed away, I went home and I was still answering fan mail for her, and unfortunately had to tell these people that she was gone if they hadn't heard. And I continued to receive letters back from them saying how sorry they were and how much she touched their lives. And I'm so proud of her.
Still, to this day, she is funny, she is relatable, she is incredibly appealing.
And I have to say, too, boy, the real Annie Oakley continues to pop out in schools, in history. I have been called in to talk about Mother. It continues on.
I'd say this is a real happy ending. Good night, folks.
One of the primary directors of Annie Oakley was Frank McDonald, and of course he was the director of Wyatt Earp, starring Hugh O'Brian. And he had a very long history with Autry, as most of the people that Autry worked with did. But Frank McDonald had started at Warner Brothers as a dialogue director and had worked for Michael Curtiz, and he had worked with Betty Davis and Paul Muni. Then he went to RKO, and then later, of course, he went to Republic. And he was had a very forceful style. And his westerns were very aggressive. And it really suited well when he would do crime dramas. The Purple Gang, for example, with Barry Sullivan and Robert Blake, is, to me, that's one of his masterwork. That is very close to Don Siegel and Phil Carlson territory. He did a very good movie with Richard Conte called The Big Tip-Off. And later in a very nice science fiction movie that Alex Gordon produced called The Underwater City. He was not a fanciful director, but he knew how to focus, particularly in his action scenes. They seem to have a little bit more of an edge. He wasn't a big one for fancy camera work, but there was energy there. And if you will, something a little rough-hewn about it that I think was quite good and quite driving for Annie Oakley. Ray Nazaro, who also directed a lot of the episodes, of course, was directing Gene Autry's movies at Columbia. And he had been at Columbia for a very long time and had a very long, steady history there. Now, some of these men had careers going all the way back to silent movies. And when they found their way to Republic, that's where they would find their home, especially if they were journeymen and they could make a movie in 10 days, they could make a movie in 8 days or 12 days or whatever was required. Those were exactly the type of filmmakers that Gene Autry was looking for. Now, with George Archambault, of course, he had started out rather prominently and directing some very good movies, like The Lost Squadron, for example, for Marion C. Cooper. And then his career kind of settled down and he ended up doing the program pictures. But these were efficient, very solid directors, and these television shows were made very, very quickly. The Flying A stuff was really shot very quickly, and these men had to know how to get it on film, in the can, so it could cut together, because the budgets were so low. There was just not money to spend for anything, and you needed to have someone with an efficient cinema eye to make that work.
Howdy, friends and neighbors. We're proud and happy to be here today. All in nice green bill. Tim, come here.
You got me, kid.
I've been invited to a jubilee in heaven after wine.
Doc's got a line on the kid.
The De La Torre Ranch on the border road. That was Carlos just in here.
It'll be your job, Sam. Get Carlos. Keep him away from the ranch. The rest of you pick up the other men and get that kid. Burn him out if you have to.
And who hung the moon in the starry sky? Somebody bigger than you and I.
Turn those men loose.
Always stealing. You ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Where's Dean, boy? Where is he, Chan?
Oh, Gene. Gene.
Before
I sign any new contract, I want to be sure I'm getting the best harness stock for the stage line.
Well, just put it to the test, one against the other. My thoroughbreds will run Autry's Mustangs right off the road.
Don't be too sure. The race isn't over yet. Pull over, Jeff. Give me room.
Gene, look out!
Pull over!
That was a good punch.
In the blue Canadian Rockies, spring is sighing through the trees.
Yodel, 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 what am I gonna do? Yodel, 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 what a hullabaloo.
I told you to keep those trucks out of here.
You can't close this road off. We've been using it for years.
Well, your men aren't going to run me out, so they might as well stop trying.
Why should anybody be watching me?
Maybe they don't trust you. You better watch your step or it'll be the end of your private little gold rush.
And then somebody shot at me just like they did last night. Are you trying to accuse me? Or you just... Oh!
Get inside, quick.
We'll have to have those guns. You better hurry if you don't want Mitchell's men driving us out of here.
They're gone.
Where are they? Who's got them?
How should I know?
Mr. Gene, you mayor, you elected with a landslide.
On top of Old Smoky, all covered with snow.
Hey, Tom. I've hit it. Eureka!
Nobody's closing me.
I was elected to run this town. If you don't want a mob in here throwing you out, better start packing.
Take the gun.
Men come from Indian Gulch. They come steal all the lady.
How do you know?
My cousin, he tell me he from other camp.
He's dead.
If that's what you want to do.
The smell of the rain, the roll of the plane, the feel of my seat in the saddle. I'd give all I own if I could be home, back on the range punching cattle.
What if Bluebell loses?
I get her, but I tear up the IOUs and you're clean.
Here's your chance to pick up those IOUs without Autry finding out anything about it.
You better get down to the finish line, Feeney, or I'll be there before you.
Come on, Bluebell!
Thanks, Burns.
didn't tell you to give him a rifle.
But he grabbed it out of my hand.
Now we gotta get him.
Randy! I won't give myself up.
I'm coming over there with my hands up. If you want to shoot, go ahead.
Come on, kill him, Todd.
Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight? Come out tonight. Come out tonight. Oh, Buffalo gal, won't you come out tonight and dance by the light of the moon?
You know you're working yourself out of a job, don't you? Don't see as that's any of your business. Our business is stopping barbed wire now, before all the ranchers start using it. Get off the white.
Get those shovels.
You ain't gonna make us dig our own graves.
That fence is going back up, and you're gonna dig the post holes.
Who is it? Can't you see I'm busy?